Excuse me, little girl. This section isn't for your kind. Victoria Hartwell's voice sliced through the quiet hum of United Airways Flight 428's first-class cabin like a blade through silk. She stood in the aisle designer handbag, clutched like a weapon, staring down at 17-year-old Amara Johnson in seat 2A. Before we dive into this story that rocked the aviation industry and changed air travel forever, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe every passenger deserves respect regardless of how they look, hit that subscribe button right now, because in 8 minutes, one phone call would ground this flight and destroy careers. Amara looked up from her phone where she'd been reviewing notes for her MIT interview. She was wearing a Howard University hoodie, dark jeans, and well-worn sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned her place through hard work, not connections. "I'm sorry," Amara said, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't catch that." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand gestured dismissively toward the back of the plane. "Economy boarding is from the next gate over, dear. This is first class." The words hung in the air like poison. Other passengers looked up from their phones and tablets. An older white man in seat 3A lowered his newspaper. A Hispanic businessman across the aisle stopped typing on his laptop. You could feel the tension spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Amara's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I'm in seat 2A. This is seat 2A. Victoria's smile was sugar-coated steel. "Sweetheart, I've been flying first class longer than you've been alive. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. Perhaps you're confused about your seat assignment." The entire first-class cabin went dead silent. Passengers looked up from their phones. You could hear the engine hum, but nothing else. The kind of silence that happens when everyone knows something terrible is about to unfold. Trevor Mills, a 30-something flight attendant with nervous energy and a desperate-to-please smile, glided over like he was approaching a bomb that might explode at any second. "Is everything all right here, ladies?" Victoria turned to him with the practiced authority of someone used to getting her way. "Trevor, darling, wonderful to see you again. This young lady seems to have gotten turned around. She's sitting in first class." Trevor's eyes did a quick scan of Amara. The hoodie, the jeans, the color of her skin. His professional smile faltered for just a moment, and in that moment he made a choice that would haunt him forever. "Miss, could I see your boarding pass, please?" he asked. Amara, his tone shifting from warm to cautiously formal. Amara pulled out her phone with deliberate calm. "Marina Johnson, seat 2A, first class. Purchased 3 weeks ago." Trevor looked at the digital boarding pass, his eyebrows shooting up in genuine surprise before he masked it. The pass was legitimate premium, fully paid. But Victoria Hartwell was a frequent flyer who tipped well and had the ear of management. And this girl, well, she didn't look like she belonged in first class. "Well, this appears to be in order," Trevor said reluctantly. "Welcome aboard." But Victoria wasn't finished. Her voice rose just enough for the entire section to hear. "Trevor, I've been flying United for 15 years. I know when something isn't right. Girls like this don't just stumble into first class." The words "girls like this" landed like a slap across the face. Amara's hands tightened in her lap, but she didn't respond. She'd been taught by her father never to let anger control her actions, especially when other people were watching. Miguel Santos, a successful contractor from Phoenix in seat 3B, quietly pulled out his phone and started recording. He'd seen this before, and he knew how these things usually ended. "Ma'am Amara," said her voice crystal clear, "I have every right to be here. I purchased this ticket with my own money, and I'm not moving." Victoria's facade of politeness finally cracked. "Rights. Sweetheart, this isn't a charity flight. This section costs more than your entire outfit." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of moment where everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be remembered for a very long time. Some passengers stared at their phones, pretending they hadn't heard. Others looked directly at the confrontation, their faces showing various degrees of shock, disgust, and uncomfortable recognition. Dr. Janet Kim, an emergency room physician in seat 4A, set down her medical journal. She'd remained silent, but her expression showed she was wrestling with whether to intervene. Robert Chen, an 80-year-old retired engineer in seat 1C, had lived through the civil rights era. He'd seen this kind of discrimination before, and the familiar anger was building in his chest. But it was Trevor who made the decision that would change everything. Instead of shutting down Victoria's harassment, instead of doing his job and protecting a paying passenger, he chose the path of least resistance. "Miss Johnson," he said to Amara, "perhaps we could sort this out more privately. Maybe we could step into the galley for just a moment." Amara looked at him with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than anger. "Sort what out?" "My valid ticket, my assigned seat, or the fact that this woman has been harassing me since I sat down." Victoria sensed an opening and pounced. "Trevor, I don't feel comfortable with this situation. I think you need to call someone." Those words, "call someone," would echo through the aviation industry for months to come. Because Trevor Mills, faced with a choice between standing up to a racist passenger and protecting a teenager, chose the wrong side of history. Trevor hesitated, looking between Victoria's expectant face and Amara's calm determination. The cabin around them had transformed from a peaceful departure lounge into a charged courtroom where every passenger had become a reluctant witness. Amara Johnson wasn't just any 17-year-old. She was valedictorian of her high school class captain of the debate team and had been accepted to MIT's early admission program. But more than her achievements, it was her composure that set her apart. While other teenagers might have shouted or cried when faced with such blatant discrimination, Amara had learned from years of similar encounters to respond with dignity and intelligence. She was the daughter of David Johnson, CEO of Johnson Global Logistics, one of the largest freight and supply chain companies in North America. But Amara had insisted on buying her own ticket with money saved from her part-time job at a local tech startup. She was flying to Boston for a series of interviews and campus visits that could shape her entire future. The Howard University sweatshirt she wore wasn't just casual clothing. It represented her connection to historically black colleges and universities, a reminder of the shoulders she stood on. Her worn sneakers had carried her through countless hours of community service debate tournaments and late-night study sessions. Everything about her appearance told a story of hard work and determination, but Victoria Hartwell only saw color and class assumptions. Victoria, 52 years old, was the epitome of entitled privilege. She was the widow of a pharmaceutical executive living off a trust fund and social connections. She flew first class not because she had earned it through her own achievements, but because she had inherited the means to do so. Her cream-colored pantsuit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her gold jewelry caught the cabin lights like tiny spotlights announcing her presence. She had never worked a day in her life, never struggled to pay a bill, never been questioned about whether she belonged somewhere. The idea that a black teenager could legitimately afford first-class seating challenged her fundamental assumptions about how the world should work. Miguel Santos, in seat 3B, had built his construction company from nothing, starting with a pickup truck and a determination to provide for his family. He recognized something in Amara that reminded him of his own daughter, that quiet strength that comes from facing adversity with grace. As he continued recording, he was thinking about all the times his own children had been questioned about whether they belonged in spaces they had earned access to. Dr. Janet Kim had spent her medical career fighting for patients who didn't have advocates. She'd seen how quickly institutional bias could escalate into genuine harm. Watching this confrontation unfold, she was calculating whether and when to intervene. Her silence wasn't indifference. It was strategic patience, waiting for the right moment to act. Robert Chen had lived through an era when discrimination was legal and open. He'd watched the civil rights movement unfold on television, had witnessed the slow progress toward equality. Seeing this scene play out in 2023 brought back memories he'd hoped were ancient history. His hands gripped his newspaper tighter as he watched a new generation face the same prejudices he'd thought America had moved beyond. Trevor Mills represented something perhaps more insidious than outright racism, the complicity of institutions. He wasn't necessarily a bad person, but he was weak. Faced with a clear choice between right and wrong, he chose the path that seemed safest for his career. He knew Victoria was a frequent flyer who could complain to management. He knew she tipped well and had connections in the airline industry. Amara, despite having a legitimate ticket, was just one passenger on one flight. The cabin itself seemed to pulse with tension. The muted beige and cream tones that were designed to soothe now felt sterile and cold. The soft lighting that was meant to create an atmosphere of luxury now illuminated a scene of ugly conflict. Even the quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed louder, as if the plane itself was holding its breath. Other passengers throughout first class were processing what they were witnessing in different ways. Some pretended to be absorbed in their devices, hoping the situation would resolve itself without requiring them to take sides. Others watched openly, their discomfort visible on their faces. A few pulled out phones to record, sensing that this moment might become something larger than a simple passenger dispute. The flight crew in the galley could hear the raised voices but weren't sure how to respond. They whispered among themselves, asking if they should intervene. But Trevor was the senior flight attendant, and he seemed to be handling it. None of them wanted to overstep their authority or create a bigger scene. Meanwhile, Amara sat in her seat with her hands folded calmly in her lap, but her mind was racing. She was thinking about her father's advice about staying composed under pressure. She was thinking about her MIT interview and how this delay might affect her carefully planned schedule. She was thinking about all the other young people who faced similar discrimination but didn't have the resources or support to fight back. Most of all, she was thinking about the choice she faced she could give and accept the humiliation and move to economy to avoid further confrontation. Or she could stand her ground, knowing that doing so might escalate the situation, but also might prevent the next person from facing the same treatment. The decision she made in the next few moments would change not just her own life, but the entire landscape of passenger rights and airline accountability. Victoria's eyes swept over Amara's seat area like a hawk searching for prey. Her gaze lingered on Amara's small carry-on bag, a worn leather satchel that had clearly seen better days but was well maintained. It was the kind of bag that spoke of careful budgeting and making things last, not the expensive designer luggage that typically filled first-class overhead bins. "You know what?" Victoria announced to the cabin, her voice rising with theatrical concern. "I think I need to check something." She made a show of opening her designer purse, rummaging through its contents with increasingly frantic movements. Other passengers couldn't help but watch as she pulled out items one by one: a gold compact mirror, an expensive-looking wallet, a small velvet jewelry pouch. "Oh my God," Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a performance worthy of a soap opera. "My diamond bracelet. It's gone." The cabin, which had just begun to settle back into uncomfortable normalcy, erupted into tension again. Passengers who had been pretending not to listen suddenly looked up with sharp attention. Amara felt her stomach drop. She knew exactly where this was heading. "I had it right here in this little pouch," Victoria continued, holding up the empty velvet container. "I checked it when I got on the plane. I always check my jewelry when I travel." Trevor Mills appeared at her side instantly, his face showing professional concern mixed with barely concealed panic. A missing valuable item was exactly the kind of incident that could derail his entire shift and potentially his career. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm so sorry to hear that. When did you last see the bracelet?" Victoria's eyes locked onto Amara with laser focus. "Right after she sat down. I was putting my bag in the overhead bin, and I saw her looking at my things. really staring, like she was assessing. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to spread out of control. I absolutely did not, Amara said, her voice quiet but firm. I didn't look at your bag. I didn't even know you had jewelry with you. Oh, please, Victoria snapped, abandoning any pretense of politeness. I saw you staring at my things when I was putting my bag up. Girls like you always want what they can't afford. The phrase girls like you hit the cabin like a physical blow. Miguel Santos's recording hand steadied as he captured every word. Dr. Janet Kim set her medical journal aside completely, no longer able to pretend she wasn't witnessing something significant. Robert Chen folded his newspaper with deliberate precision and spoke for the first time. Ma'am, that's a very serious accusation you're making without any evidence. Victoria whirled on him. Evidence. I saw her looking at my bag. The bracelet was there when I boarded and now it's gone. What more evidence do you need? Maybe it fell, suggested Dr. Kim quietly. These seats are close together. Jewelry could easily... It didn't fall, Victoria interrupted sharply. I know exactly where I put it. Someone took it. Trevor Mills found himself caught in a situation spiraling far beyond his training or experience. He had a wealthy, frequent flyer claiming theft, a teenager denying the accusation, and a cabin full of increasingly agitated passengers. His next decision would prove to be the most consequential of his career. Miss Johnson, he said, his voice taking on an official tone. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the galley so we can sort this out privately. Sort what out? Amara asked. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not leaving my seat based on someone's unfounded accusation. She's refusing to cooperate, Victoria exclaimed triumphantly. That's basically an admission of guilt. Trevor, you need to call security. The word security sent a chill through the cabin. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation was now escalating into something that could involve law enforcement. Ma'am, please, Trevor said to Amara, his voice taking on a pleading quality. If you could just come with me for a few minutes, we can clear this whole thing up. Clear what up? Amara repeated. I haven't stolen anything. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm a paying passenger in my assigned seat, and I'm not moving based on some racist assumption. The word racist dropped into the conversation like a bomb. Several passengers gasped audibly. Victoria's face flushed red with indignation. How dare you? Victoria sputtered. This has nothing to do with race. This is about theft. This is about accountability. Miguel Santos stopped recording for a moment and spoke directly. Actually, ma'am, this has everything to do with race. We all heard what you said about her kind and girls like this. I was talking about age, Victoria protested weakly. About young people in first class. Not about that other thing. We all heard what we heard, said Robert Chen, his voice carrying the authority of 8 decades of life experience. Trevor Mills was now sweating visibly. His shift supervisor would want to know why first class was in chaos. The departure was already delayed. Other passengers were becoming involved. Everything in his training told him to de-escalate, but every instinct for self-preservation told him to side with the frequent flyer who could affect his job security. Miss Johnson, he said with growing firmness, I'm asking you one more time to come with me voluntarily. We need to resolve this before we can continue with departure. And I'm telling you one more time, Amara responded, that I'm not going anywhere. I want to speak to your supervisor. I want this woman's accusation investigated properly. And I want someone to actually look for this bracelet before assuming I took it. We don't have time to tear apart the cabin? Trevor protested. You don't have time to do your job? Dr. Kim asked pointedly. Victoria, sensing that public opinion was starting to turn against her, decided to escalate further. Fine. If she won't cooperate voluntarily, then you need to call the police. I'm not flying with a thief and I'm not letting her get away with this. Trevor Mills looked around the cabin at the faces staring back at him. passengers with phones recording, a teenager refusing to move from her legitimate seat, a wealthy woman demanding police intervention. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the knowledge that his next decision would define not just the rest of this flight, but possibly the rest of his career. He reached for the cabin phone. "Gate, this is lead flight attendant Mills. I need airport security at the jet bridge immediately. We have a passenger issue a refusal to comply and a possible theft." As the words left his mouth, the cabin fell into the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Every passenger understood that this confrontation had just crossed a line from which there might be no return. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar, sickening slide of prejudice and institutional failure. But this time, along with the fear and disappointment, she felt something new, a cold, determined fury. And she reached for her phone. The heavy footsteps approaching the aircraft sounded like a death march to everyone listening. Through the small first-class windows, passengers could see the flashing lights of airport security vehicles positioned near the jet bridge. What had started as a simple boarding process had transformed into what looked like a crime scene investigation. Officer Carlos Rodriguez of the Atlanta Airport Police Department stepped onto the aircraft with the confident swagger of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. He was a 15-year veteran with a complaint file thick enough to stop a door, though those complaints had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and union protection. Rodriguez saw the world in simple terms. There were people who belonged in certain places and people who didn't. His eyes immediately scanned the first-class cabin, taking in the expensive suits, designer handbags, and general atmosphere of privilege. Then his gaze landed on Amara, and his expression hardened. A black teenager in a hoodie sitting in first class wasn't just unusual to him, it was wrong. "What's the problem here?" He boomed, his hand already resting on his duty belt in a gesture of casual intimidation. Trevor Mills hurried over, relief flooding his face at having someone else take charge of the situation. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly. We have a passenger dispute involving a possible theft." "Possible theft?" Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up. This was more serious than the usual drunk passenger or medical emergency calls he typically handled. "Yes, sir," Trevor continued, gesturing toward Victoria, who had adopted a perfect pose of victimhood. "This passenger, Mrs. Hartwell, has had a valuable diamond bracelet stolen from her purse." She saw this passenger. He pointed at Amara, looking at her belongings when she was boarding. Rodriguez's eyes locked onto Amara like a predator spotting prey. "And this passenger is refusing to cooperate. She won't come to the galley to discuss the situation," Trevor explained. "She's been difficult." Rodriguez approached Amara's seat with deliberate steps designed to intimidate. He'd learned over his 15 years in law enforcement that most people, especially young people, would fold immediately when faced with police authority. "Ma'am," he said, using the title as an insult rather than respect, "I'm Officer Rodriguez with Airport Police. I need you to unbuckle your seatbelt and come with me." Amara looked up at him with clear, steady eyes. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm a ticketed passenger in my assigned seat. I'd like to know what specific evidence you have of any wrongdoing before I go anywhere." Rodriguez wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by a teenager. "Evidence. We have a witness who saw you near the victim's property, and now that property is missing. That's enough for me to detain you for questioning." "Detain me?" Amara's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Am I under arrest? Have I been read my rights?" Miguel Santos continued, recording his phone, capturing every word of the exchange. Other passengers were leaning forward in their seats, straining to hear every detail of a confrontation that was spiraling rapidly out of control. "You're not under arrest yet," Rodriguez said, emphasizing the word "yet" like a threat. "But that can change real quick if you keep refusing to cooperate. Now I'm telling you one last time, unbuckle that seatbelt and come with me." "Or what?" Amara asked, her voice trembling but defiant. "You'll arrest me for sitting in a seat I paid for. You'll assault me in front of all these witnesses for an accusation with no evidence. The word assault sent ripples of tension through the cabin. Dr. Janet Kim sat forward in her seat, her medical training making her acutely aware of how quickly situations like this could turn violent. Robert Chen's hands gripped his armrests tighter, memories of civil rights-era confrontations flooding back. Rodriguez's face darkened with anger. Look, kid, I don't know what kind of attitude you think you can cop with me, but it's not going to work. You're on an airplane, which makes this federal jurisdiction. You're accused of theft, and you're refusing to cooperate with a law enforcement officer. That's about 3 different charges right there. I want to speak to your supervisor, Amara said clearly. I want this entire interaction documented, and I want someone to actually investigate this alleged theft before you threaten to arrest me. I am the supervisor. Rodriguez snapped, his professional demeanor finally cracking completely. And the only investigating that needs to be done is finding out what you did with that bracelet. Victoria Hartwell, emboldened by Rodriguez's aggressive stance, decided to add fuel to the fire. Officer, I want her searched. I want her bag searched. And I want her removed from this aircraft. Ma'am, we'll get to all of that, Rodriguez assured her. Then he turned back to Amara with barely concealed hostility. Last chance, kid. Stand up and walk off this plane voluntarily, or I'll remove you myself. The cabin held its collective breath. Everyone present understood they were witnessing a crucial moment, the kind of confrontation that could define how power and authority were exercised in American society. Amara Johnson, 17 years old, looked up at the uniformed officer towering over her seat and made a choice that would reverberate through the aviation industry for years to come. No, she said quietly. The single word was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of absolute conviction. It cut through Officer Rodriguez's assumptions like glass through silk. In his 15 years of law enforcement, he wasn't used to being told no, especially not by a teenage girl. What did you just say to me? Rodriguez demanded, stepping closer to her seat. I said no, Amara repeated, her voice growing stronger. I haven't stolen anything. I haven't broken any laws. I have a legal right to be in this seat, and I'm not moving based on false accusations and racial profiling. The phrase racial profiling hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. It was the one accusation that could destroy a police career faster than any other, and he knew it. His face flushed red with a combination of anger and fear. You think you can play the race card on me? He snarled. This has nothing to do with race. This is about theft. This is about law and order. This is about a black teenager being automatically assumed guilty. Amara shot back, her calm finally cracking. This is about everyone in this cabin seeing a girl in a hoodie and deciding she doesn't belong here. Miguel Santos's phone captured every word as other passengers began pulling out their own devices. The confrontation was being documented from multiple angles, creating a real-time record of institutional bias in action. Rodriguez realized the situation was getting out of hand, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead of de-escalating, he decided to assert his authority through intimidation. That's it, he announced loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. You're under arrest for theft, interfering with a flight crew, and resisting a law enforcement officer. As he reached for his handcuffs, Amara made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed a number she had memorized years ago. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered that would turn this confrontation from a local incident into a national crisis. Dad Amara's voice carried clearly through the first-class cabin, cutting through the tension like a knife. I need you right now. I'm on United Flight 428, and they're trying to remove me from first class. Officer Rodriguez reached for her phone. Hang up that phone right now. You're under arrest. But Amara held the device away from his grasp, and a new voice filled the cabin, calm, measured, but carrying an unmistakable authority that made everyone freeze. Amara, what's happening? Are you safe? I'm safe for now, Dad. But there's a police officer here trying to arrest me for a theft I didn't commit. A passenger accused me of stealing her bracelet just because I'm sitting in first class. The voice on the other end sharpened with the precision of a scalpel. Put whoever's in charge on the phone. Now. Rodriguez, despite himself, hesitated. There was something in that voice that suggested this wasn't going to be a typical parent pleading for their child, but his pride overrode his instincts. Sir, your daughter needs to hang up the phone and come with me for questioning. Officer. The voice came through clearly, and Rodriguez could hear it was now on speaker. This is David Johnson. You have exactly 1 minute to explain to me why you're threatening to arrest my daughter for sitting in a seat she legally purchased. Rodriguez scoffed. Sir, with all due respect, I don't care who you think you are. Your daughter is suspected of theft, and she's interfering with my investigation. Badge number David Johnson's voice cut through Rodriguez's bluster like steel. What's your badge number and what's the name of your supervisor? I don't have to badge number. Now. Something in the tone made Rodriguez automatically reach for his badge before catching himself. Look, Mr. Johnson, your daughter is... Has my daughter been read her rights, officer? She's not technically under arrest yet, but... Then why can't she use her phone? Has she been charged with a crime she's suspected of? Has evidence been collected? Has the alleged stolen item been reported to your department? Has my daughter been given an opportunity to defend herself? The rapid-fire questions came like bullets from a prosecutor, each one exposing another hole in Rodriguez's approach. Other passengers listened with growing fascination as the officer who had seemed so confident moments before began to stumble over his answers. Sir, there's a procedure here. Yes, there is. David Johnson agreed. And you're not following it. Officer, what's your supervisor's name? Rodriguez was now sweating visibly. Lieutenant Martinez is my supervisor, but get him on the phone. Right now. Victoria Hartwell, who had been watching this exchange with growing alarm, decided to interject. Officer, don't let him intimidate you. I want this girl arrested. I want her searched. This is ridiculous. David Johnson's voice came through the speaker again, and this time there was an edge to it that made the entire cabin go quiet. Ma'am, I suggest you be very careful about what you say next. This conversation is being recorded, and false accusations carry serious legal consequences. The cabin fell into the kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they're witnessing something that will be remembered for a very long time. Trevor Mills stood frozen by the galley, understanding that his simple passenger dispute had transformed into something far beyond his ability to control. Miguel Santos continued recording, but now other passengers were pulling out phones as well. Dr. Janet Kim was documenting the interaction from her medical perspective, noting the signs of escalating tension and the potential for violence. Robert Chen sat with his hands folded, watching a scene that reminded him of civil rights confrontations he'd witnessed decades before. Officer Rodriguez David Johnson continued, I want you to think very carefully about your next actions. My daughter is a minor, sitting in a seat she purchased legally, accused of a crime with no evidence, and you're threatening to arrest her without following proper procedure. How do you think this is going to look when it hits the news? Rodriguez felt trapped between his pride and a growing realization that this situation was spiraling out of control. Sir, I'm just doing my job. No, officer, you're not. Your job is to investigate crimes based on evidence. Your job is to protect citizens, not intimidate them. Your job is to de-escalate situations, not create them. The methodical dismantling of Rodriguez's authority continued with surgical precision. Every question exposed another failure of procedure, another assumption made without investigation, another step taken without justification. Here's what's going to happen next, David Johnson announced to the entire cabin. Officer Rodriguez is going to step back and allow a proper investigation to take place. The flight attendant is going to search for this alleged missing bracelet. And if no evidence of any crime is found, my daughter is going to continue her journey to Boston. And if we don't? Rodriguez asked, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. The pause that followed was loaded with implications. When David Johnson spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Officer, I'm looking at United Airways' stock price right now. It's down 2% since this video started going viral 15 minutes ago. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to make a phone call that will cost this airline approximately $200 million in annual revenue. Then I'm going to make another call that will have your supervisor here within 10 minutes. Then I'm calling my legal team, the NAACP, and every major news network I have on speed dial. The cabin was now so quiet that the only sound was the gentle hum of the aircraft's air conditioning. Every passenger understood they were witnessing the real-time collision of institutional power and personal authority. Rodriguez looked around the cabin, seeing for the first time the phones recording him, the faces watching his every move. The situation that had transformed from routine police work into a potential career-ending crisis. "Sir," he said finally, and for the first time, his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Maybe we should slow down and figure out what really happened here." David Johnson's response would define everything that came next. "Officer Rodriguez." David Johnson's voice came through the phone with the precision of a surgeon using a scalpel. "I'm going to ask you some very simple questions. Please answer them yes or no." Rodriguez looked around the cabin, acutely aware that multiple cameras were recording his every response. The confident authority he'd projected just minutes before was cracking under the methodical questioning. "Have you verified my daughter's boarding pass?" Rodriguez glanced at Trevor Mills, who had been standing frozen by the galley throughout the confrontation. "Well," the flight attendant said, "Officer, I didn't ask what the flight attendant said. I asked if you have verified her ticket. Yes or no?" "No, but have you examined the alleged crime scene for evidence of theft?" "Sir," the passenger reported. "Yes or no, officer? Have you examined anything?" "No." "Have you asked to see this bracelet that's allegedly missing? Have you verified that it exists? Have you documented its value? Have you taken any steps to investigate whether a crime actually occurred?" Each question landed like a hammer blow, exposing the complete absence of actual police work. Rodriguez realized with growing horror that he had threatened to arrest someone without conducting even the most basic investigation. Victoria Hartwell, sensing the momentum shifting against her, decided to escalate her claims. "The bracelet is worth $20,000, she announced loudly. "It's a family heirloom. This is grand theft." Dr. Janet Kim, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been sitting here for the past 30 minutes. I saw your bracelet fall under seat 1C about 20 minutes ago, right after you put your bag in the overhead bin." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed red with anger. "That's impossible." "I would have seen it fall." "You were busy arguing with the flight attendant about overhead space." Dr. Kim continued calmly. "I saw the bracelet drop, but I didn't want to interrupt your conversation." Miguel Santos stopped recording for a moment to address the cabin directly. "I've got all of this on video." The woman never looked under any seat, never asked anyone to help her search. She just immediately accused the young lady of theft. Robert Chen nodded approvingly. "In my 80 years, I've learned that the truth usually comes out if you give it time." David Johnson's voice cut through the growing chatter. "Trevor, is that your name? You're the flight attendant?" Trevor Mills approached the phone, reluctantly understanding that his career was hanging by a thread. "Yes, sir. I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight." "Trevor, did you search for this bracelet before calling the police?" "Well, Mrs. Hartwell said, did you search? Did you look under the seats? Did you check the overhead bins? Did you do anything other than accept one passenger's word and threaten another?" Trevor's silence spoke volumes. "Trevor, I want you to get down on your hands and knees right now and look under seat 1C. "Sir." I don't think Trevor David Johnson's voice carried absolute authority. United Airways is about to face the largest discrimination lawsuit in aviation history. Your cooperation in finding the truth might be the only thing that prevents this company from hemorrhaging money for the next decade. Look under the seat. Reluctantly, Trevor knelt down and peered under Robert Chen's seat. His face went white as he reached underneath and pulled out a diamond bracelet that caught the cabin lights like captured starlight. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That can't be my bracelet. Someone must have planted it there. You're suggesting Miguel Santos said with barely contained disgust that this 17-year-old girl stole your bracelet, then crawled under someone else's seat to plant it as evidence, all while being watched by a cabin full of passengers. Officer Rodriguez stared at the bracelet in Trevor's hand, realizing that his 15-year career had just taken a potentially fatal hit. He had threatened to arrest an innocent person based on nothing more than racial profiling and lazy assumptions. David Johnson's voice came through the speaker again, and this time it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Officer Rodriguez, you have just attempted to arrest my daughter for a crime that never occurred. You violated her civil rights, you failed to conduct even basic police work, and you did it all in front of witnesses and cameras. Sir, you were just profiling a black teenager because she didn't fit your assumptions about who belongs in first class. Officer, you're about to become the poster child for everything that's wrong with law enforcement in America. Rodriguez felt his world crashing down around him. Mr. Johnson, maybe we can work this out? Work what out? The fact that you threatened to arrest my daughter without evidence. The fact that you never investigated the alleged crime. The fact that you assumed guilt based on her appearance. Victoria made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just concerned about security. Anyone can make a mistake. David Johnson's response would echo through aviation history. Ma'am, racism isn't a mistake. It's a choice. And choices have consequences. The moment those words left the speaker, everyone in the cabin understood that this confrontation had moved far beyond a simple passenger dispute. This was now about accountability, justice, and the power of one phone call to change everything. Trevor Mills looked at the bracelet in his hand, then at Amara sitting calmly in her seat, then at the cameras recording his every move. He understood that he had just participated in something that would define his career, and possibly his entire future. Officer Rodriguez stared at his reflection in the cabin window, seeing for the first time not a law enforcement officer maintaining order, but a man whose prejudices had been exposed in the most public way possible. And David Johnson, speaking from his office hundreds of miles away, wasn't finished. His next words would trigger an avalanche of consequences that would reshape an entire industry. While the confrontation continued in the cabin of Flight 428, David Johnson's other phone line was ringing in the executive offices of United Airways headquarters in Chicago. The caller ID showed a number that could make or break quarterly earnings reports. Thomas Bradford, CEO of United Airways, was in his corner office reviewing profit margins when his assistant's voice came over the intercom with unusual urgency. Sir, you have an emergency call from David Johnson of Johnson Global Logistics. He says it's about Flight 4228 and it's extremely urgent. Bradford's blood pressure spiked immediately. Johnson Global Logistics was United's largest cargo client, responsible for $180 million in annual revenue. David Johnson wasn't someone who called with emergencies unless something catastrophic was happening. Mr. Johnson Bradford answered on the first ring. What can I do for you? Thomas. David's voice was ice-cold professional. I need you to pull up the passenger manifest for United Flight 428 departing Atlanta for Boston. My daughter, Amara Johnson, is in seat 2A. Bradford's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up the flight information. Yes, I see her here. Is there a problem with her service? Thomas. Your employees are currently threatening to arrest my 17-year-old daughter for a theft that never occurred. Your flight attendant called airport police without investigating. Your officer is profiling her based on her race and appearance, and all of it is being recorded and live-streamed to social media. Bradford nearly dropped his phone. Mr. Johnson, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is your staff's assumption that a black teenager can't legitimately afford first-class seating. Thomas, I'm looking at your stock price right now. It's down 3% in the last 20 minutes. How much lower do you think it'll go when this hits the evening news? Bradford was already pulling up the airline's social media monitoring dashboard. His worst fears were confirmed. First class. Discrimination was trending on Twitter. Videos from the flight were racking up hundreds of thousands of views on TikTok, and major news outlets were starting to pick up the story. Mr. Johnson, let me see what I can do to resolve this situation. Thomas, you're not understanding the gravity of this moment. Your employees didn't just make a mistake. They exposed a pattern of discrimination that's about to cost you everything. Bradford's legal team was already rushing into his office, having monitored the social media explosion. His head counsel whispered urgently in his ear about liability exposure, civil rights violations, and potential federal investigations. David, what do you want from me? Bradford asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. I want immediate action. I want accountability. And I want assurance that no other passenger will ever face what my daughter is facing right now. Of course, absolutely. I can have our customer service team. Thomas, you're still not hearing me. David Johnson's voice carried the weight of absolute finality. Johnson Global currently has a $12 million shipment of temperature-sensitive medical supplies in the cargo hold of Flight 428. Those supplies are bound for disaster relief operations in Southeast Asia. They have a 6-hour window before they become worthless. Bradford's mouth went dry. He understood exactly where this was heading. If this flight doesn't take off in the next 10 minutes with my daughter treated with the dignity and respect she deserves, I'm pulling my cargo. Not just from this flight, Thomas. From all United flights. Forever. The words hit Bradford like a physical blow. $180 million in annual revenue. Thousands of jobs dependent on that contract. Stock prices that could crater overnight. Board meetings that would end careers. David, surely we can work this out, Thomas. I'm texting you a link to the live stream right now. Watch it. Watch your employee's profile and threaten my daughter. Watch them assume criminality based on her appearance. Then tell me if you think United Airways deserves another dollar of my business. Bradford clicked on the link and watched in horror as Officer Rodriguez threatened to arrest Amara, as Victoria Hartwell made racist assumptions, as Trevor Mills failed to investigate or de-escalate. Every moment was being captured in high definition and broadcast to a growing audience of outraged viewers. "Oh my God," Bradford whispered. Thomas, United Airways has exactly 8 minutes to make this right. 8 minutes before I make the phone call that ends our business relationship. 8 minutes before your airline becomes synonymous with discrimination and institutional racism. Bradford was already barking orders to his staff. Get me the Atlanta airport manager on the line. Get me the police chief. Get me our crisis communications team. Get me everyone right now. Sir, his assistant interrupted. CNN is calling. They want a statement about the discrimination incident on Flight 428. Bradford felt his world imploding in real time. David, what do you want me to do? I want your people off my daughter. I want a formal apology. I want the officer removed from the situation. I want the flight attendant retrained or replaced. And I want policies in place to ensure this never happens again. Done. All of it. I'll make the calls right now. Thomas, you have 7 minutes. The line went dead. Bradford stared at his phone, understanding that the next 7 minutes would determine whether United Airways survived as a company or became a cautionary tale about corporate complacency in the face of discrimination. He began making calls. Meanwhile, back on Flight 428, Passengers were watching their phones as news alerts began popping up from major outlets. The story was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined, transforming a single incident into a national conversation about civil rights, corporate responsibility, and the power of social media to hold institutions accountable. David Johnson sat in his office watching multiple live streams of his daughter's confrontation while monitoring United's stock price, social media trending topics, and incoming calls from news organizations. He had built his logistics empire by understanding that power comes not from violence or threats, but from having leverage at precisely the right moment. And this was that moment. His next phone call would determine whether this ended with justice or with the complete destruction of a major airline. The news alert that flashed across passengers' phones at 3:47 p.m. read, "Breaking video shows, police threatening to arrest black teen in first class goes viral." Within minutes, the hashtag Justice for Amara was trending nationally, with the original video approaching 1 million views. Trevor Mills stood in the galley holding Victoria's diamond bracelet, watching his career disintegrate in real time. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor. "What the hell is happening on 428 Corporate is losing their minds." Officer Rodriguez had gone pale as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He'd threatened to arrest an innocent teenager, failed to conduct any actual investigation, and done it all while being recorded from multiple angles. His 15 years of law enforcement were about to end in the most public way possible. Victoria Hartwell was desperately trying to control the narrative, but her voice had taken on a shrill quality that made her sound increasingly unstable. "This is all being blown out of proportion," she insisted to anyone who would listen. It was an honest mistake. "Anyone could have Ma'am Miguel Santos interrupted, still recording. We all heard what you said about her kind and girls like this. That wasn't a mistake. That was racism, plain and simple." Dr. Janet Kim had stood up from her seat and was now documenting the incident from her position as a medical professional and witness. "As someone who's testified in legal proceedings before, I want to state clearly for the record that this young woman has been subjected to racial profiling, false accusations, and police intimidation without any evidence of wrongdoing." Robert Chen nodded approvingly. "In 80 years, I've seen this same story play out too many times, but I've never seen it documented this thoroughly or shared this widely. Technology changes things. The cabin had transformed into something resembling a courtroom, with passengers choosing sides and bearing witness to a moment that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come." Amara remained seated throughout the chaos, her composure remarkable for someone who had just been threatened with arrest. She spoke quietly into her phone, updating her father on the situation, while the adults around her scrambled to manage the consequences of their actions. "Dad, they found the bracelet under another passenger's seat, just like people said they would if anyone had bothered to look." David Johnson's voice came through clearly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Sweetheart, I'm proud of how you've handled yourself. Are you okay? I'm okay. But Dad, this isn't just about me anymore. Look at how many people are watching this." Indeed, the passenger count on Miguel's live stream had climbed to over 50,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from around the world. First-class discrimination was now trending in 12 countries. Trevor Mills approached Amara's seat reluctantly, the bracelet still in his hand. "Miss Johnson, I want to apologize. I should have investigated before calling security. I should have—" "You should have treated me like a human being," Amara said quietly. "You should have asked questions before making assumptions. You should have done your job instead of choosing the path of least resistance." Her words hit Trevor like physical blows. He realized that every excuse he might offer would sound hollow compared to the simple truth he had failed to protect a passenger from discrimination because it was easier to side with the person who looked like she belonged. Officer Rodriguez's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from his supervisor. "Rodriguez, what's your status? We're getting calls from CNN, the ACLU, and the mayor's office." What the hell is going on out there? Rodriguez keyed his radio with a shaking hand. Lieutenant, I need backup and a supervisor on scene immediately. This situation is complicated. Complicated how Rodriguez looked around the cabin at the phones recording him, the passengers glaring at him, and the teenager whose civil rights he had just violated on camera. I may have made an error in judgment. The understatement of the century. David Johnson's voice cut through the chaos one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when institutions fail to police themselves. When profit margins matter more than human dignity. When convenience matters more than justice. His words were being broadcast live to thousands of viewers, turning a single incident into a teachable moment about power, privilege, and accountability. Officer Rodriguez David continued, You're about to become famous. Not for good police work, not for serving your community, but for threatening to arrest a child because she didn't match your assumptions about who belongs where. Rodriguez felt the walls closing in around him. His career, his pension, his reputation, all of it hanging by a thread that was fraying with every passing second. Victoria made one final desperate attempt to salvage her position. This whole thing is being manipulated. That man on the phone is probably some kind of civil rights agitator trying to create an incident where none existed. The irony was lost on her that she was proving David Johnson's point about institutional bias, even as she denied it existed. Miguel Santos turned his camera toward Victoria. Ma'am, you accused an innocent teenager of theft without evidence. You called the police on someone whose only crime was sitting in a seat she paid for, and now you want to blame everyone except yourself. The social media reaction was swift and brutal. Comments were pouring in from viewers around the world, many sharing their own experiences with discrimination, others calling for boycotts of United Airways, still others demanding justice for Amara. In corporate offices across Chicago, United Airways executives were watching their company's reputation disintegrate in real time. Stock prices continued to fall. Legal teams were assembling. Crisis management consultants were being called in. And on Flight 428, a 17-year-old girl continued to sit calmly in her assigned seat unwittingly, becoming the catalyst for a national conversation about race justice and the power of social media to hold powerful institutions accountable. The storm was only beginning. At 4:03 p.m., Thomas Bradford's private elevator opened directly into the departures level of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The CEO of United Airways had never made an emergency trip to handle a passenger incident, but then again, no passenger incident had ever threatened to destroy his company in real time. Bradford was accompanied by United's head of legal affairs, the regional operations manager, and a crisis communications specialist who was frantically monitoring social media on 3 different phones. The numbers were staggering: 2.3 million video views in less than an hour, Justice for Amara trending in 18 countries, and United's stock price down 12% in after-hours trading. Sir, the communications specialist reported as they rushed toward the gate, we're getting interview requests from every major news network. The NAACP has issued a statement. The Congressional Black Caucus is demanding a federal investigation. This has gone completely viral. Bradford's phone rang. David Johnson calling back exactly on schedule. Thomas, I'm looking at my watch. Time's up. Have you resolved this situation? David, I'm literally walking onto the plane right now. I flew down personally to handle this. That's nice, Thomas. But my daughter is still being detained by your staff, still being treated like a criminal, and still waiting for basic human decency. What exactly have you resolved? Bradford reached Flight 428's jet bridge to find a crowd of airport officials, additional police supervisors, and news crews that had somehow gotten word of the situation. The story had exploded beyond social media into mainstream news in record time. Mr. Johnson, I need 5 more minutes. You've had an hour, Thomas. An hour to do the right thing. An hour to show that United Airways values human dignity over corporate convenience. Instead, you've shown the world exactly who you really are. Bradford stepped onto the aircraft to find a cabin in chaos. Passengers were standing in the aisles, some recording, others arguing. Flight attendants huddled in the galley looking terrified. In the center of it all sat Amara Johnson, remarkably composed, despite having been the target of discrimination, false accusations, and police intimidation. Miss Johnson, Bradford said, approaching her seat, "I'm Thomas Bradford, CEO of United Airways. On behalf of the company, I want to offer you our most sincere apologies." Amara looked up at him with eyes that held more wisdom than most adults twice her age. "Mr. Bradford, I appreciate that you came down here personally, but apologies without action are just words." Her father's voice continued through the phone speaker. "Thomas, my daughter is right. You can apologize all you want, but the damage is done. Your employees failed, your training failed, your oversight failed, and most importantly, your values failed." Bradford felt the weight of hundreds of thousands of social media viewers watching his every move, analyzing every word, waiting to see whether United Airways would step up or continue to fail. "Mr. Johnson, what do you want from us? What would make this right, Thomas? It's too late to make this right. The question now is whether you're going to learn from this or try to cover it up." Bradford's legal counsel whispered urgently in his ear about liability, about civil rights violations, about the federal investigation that was almost certainly coming. But Bradford was no longer thinking like a lawyer or a CEO. He was thinking like a father who had just watched a teenager be humiliated by his company. "David, I want to do the right thing here. Tell me what that looks like." The right thing, Thomas, would have been training your employees not to profile passengers. The right thing would have been investigating before accusing. The right thing would have been treating my daughter like a human being instead of a problem to be removed. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of phones recording passengers murmuring and the distant hum of airport operations continuing around them. "But since we can't go back and do the right thing," David continued, "let's talk about what happens next. Officer Rodriguez has violated my daughter's civil rights. Trevor Mills has failed in his basic professional duties. Mrs. Hartwell has made false accusations based on racial bias. And your airline has shown the world that discrimination is still alive and well at 30,000 feet. Bradford looked around the cabin at the faces staring back at him, some angry, some disappointed, some curious to see how one of America's largest corporations would handle being caught in such a public failure. "Mr. Johnson, I take full responsibility for what happened here today. This is unacceptable and it will never happen again." "Thomas, those are nice words, but actions matter more than words. And the action I'm taking right now is permanent termination of Johnson Global's contract with United Airways." The words hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Even passengers who didn't understand the financial implications could sense the magnitude of what had just happened. "David, please let's not make any hasty decisions, Thomas. I've had an hour to think about this decision. There's nothing hasty about it. You've lost $180 million in annual revenue because your employees couldn't treat a teenager with basic respect." Bradford felt his company's future slipping away in real time. "The cargo, David. The medical supplies on this flight will be offloaded immediately. I've already arranged alternative transportation. Those disaster relief supplies will reach their destination, just not on United flights." Bradford's operations manager was frantically calculating the ripple effects: delayed departure, cargo, rebalancing, passenger connections, missed crew, overtime, gate fees. But those were minor concerns compared to the larger crisis unfolding. "Mr. Johnson," Bradford said desperately, "what would it take to change your mind?" David Johnson's answer would define not just the resolution of this incident, but the future of passenger rights in American aviation. By 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the video of Amara Johnson's confrontation with airport police had been viewed over 5 million times across multiple platforms. What had started as Miguel Santos's Facebook live stream had exploded into a multimedia phenomenon that was reshaping public discourse about civil rights, corporate responsibility, and the power of social media to hold institutions accountable. CNN's breaking news banner read, "Video Black Teen Threatened with Arrest in First-Class Airline CEO Responds." The story had moved beyond social media into mainstream news coverage with legal experts, civil rights leaders, and aviation industry analysts all weighing in on the implications. Inside the cabin of Flight 428, the atmosphere had transformed from chaos into something resembling a trial. Passengers were no longer simply witnesses. They had become a jury deliberating the failures of multiple institutions in real time. Dr. Janet Kim had taken it upon herself to document the medical and psychological impact of the incident. As a physician, I want to state clearly that what I've witnessed here constitutes psychological trauma inflicted by authority figures on a minor. This young woman has maintained remarkable composure under circumstances that would break many adults. Miguel Santos continued his live stream, which had become the primary source of real-time coverage for news outlets around the world. "We're at 200,000 concurrent viewers right now," he announced to the cabin. "People from every continent are watching this. This isn't just about one flight anymore. This is about how we treat each other as human beings." Robert Chen, who had lived through the civil rights era, provided historical context that resonated with viewers across generational lines. "I've seen discrimination evolve over 8 decades. It used to be overt and legal. Now it's subtle and deniable. But the impact on its victims remains just as devastating." Officer Rodriguez had retreated to the back of the first-class section where he was fielding increasingly urgent calls from his supervisors. The Atlanta Police Department's public relations nightmare was growing by the minute, with bad cop and police accountability trending alongside justice for Amara. Trevor Mills had been effectively suspended in place, with senior United personnel now handling all communication with passengers. He stood in the galley watching his 15-year career in aviation come to an end via smartphone screen. Victoria Hartwell had attempted to leave the aircraft but was being detained as a material witness to the incident. Her earlier racism had been captured in high definition, and legal experts were already discussing potential charges for filing false police reports and defamation. But it was Amara herself who had become the story's moral center. Despite being the target of discrimination, false accusations, and police intimidation, she had maintained her dignity and composure in a way that inspired viewers around the world. "I want to say something," Amara announced to the cabin, and Miguel adjusted his camera to focus on her. "This isn't really about me. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. It's about every kid who's been assumed guilty before being proven innocent. It's about changing a culture that sees skin color before it sees humanity." Her words were being broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers, making her an unintentional spokesperson for a generation that refused to accept discrimination as normal. The financial impact on United Airways was becoming clearer by the minute. Their stock price had fallen 15% in after-hours trading, wiping out nearly $2 billion in market capitalization. Boycott hashtags were trending in multiple languages. Travel booking sites were reporting cancellations of United flights as passengers chose competitors. Thomas Bradford stood in the aisle of his own aircraft watching his company's reputation disintegrate in real time. He understood that this moment would define his legacy as CEO and potentially determine whether United Airways survived as an independent company. "Miss Johnson," he said, addressing Amara directly, "I want you to know that changes are going to be made. Real, substantial changes to how we train our employees, how we handle passenger disputes, and how we ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Amara looked at him with the kind of direct gaze that made adults uncomfortable. "Mr. Bradford, I appreciate that you're here, but promises made during a crisis aren't the same as changes made by choice. Your company had opportunities to prevent this situation, and at every step, your employees chose discrimination over investigation. Her analysis cut through Bradford's corporate speak like a scalpel through tissue. Here was a 17-year-old demonstrating more leadership and moral clarity than the adults who were supposed to be managing the situation. David Johnson's voice came through the speaker one more time. Thomas, you're witnessing something remarkable here. My daughter is showing your employees and your customers what dignity looks like under pressure. She's teaching a master class in grace under fire. And she's doing it while your staff continues to fail her. The live stream chat was exploding with comments from viewers around the world. This girl is going to be president someday. United Airlines just lost a customer for life. This is what courage looks like. Her parents raised her right. Fire everyone who threatened this kid. The incident had transcended its original context to become a catalyst for broader conversations about institutional bias, corporate accountability, and the power of individual dignity to challenge unjust activities. As evening news programs began featuring the story as their lead segment, it became clear that Flight 428 would never take off as scheduled. This was no longer a transportation incident. It was a civil rights moment that would be studied and remembered for decades to come. And at the center of it all sat Amara Johnson, whose quiet strength and moral clarity had turned what could have been a humiliating experience into a teaching moment for an entire nation. The sun was setting over Hartsfield-Jackson Airport when Lieutenant Maria Gonzalez, a 20-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department, arrived at Gate B47 to personally assess the situation that had exploded across social media and was now leading the evening news on every major network. Gonzalez took one look at the scene. Cameras everywhere, passengers recording from multiple angles, a teenager sitting calmly while adults scrambled around her, and immediately understood the magnitude of her department's crisis. Officer Rodriguez, she said, her voice carrying the authority that comes from 2 decades of law enforcement, step away from the passenger and brief me on this situation. Rodriguez, sweating visibly, approached his supervisor with the demeanor of a man whose career was over. Lieutenant, the passenger was accused of theft. She refused to cooperate with questioning, and I deemed detention necessary for investigation. Gonzalez looked at him with the kind of disappointment that hurts more than anger. Carlos, did you investigate the alleged theft? Did you examine evidence? Did you follow any standard procedure before threatening to arrest a minor? The silence was answer enough. Lieutenant Dr. Janet Kim interjected. I'm a physician, and I witnessed the entire incident. Officer Rodriguez made no attempt to investigate. He never examined the alleged crime scene, never verified that a crime occurred, and never followed proper procedure for detaining a minor. The bracelet was found under my seat. Robert Chen added exactly where Dr. Kim said she saw it fall 20 minutes before any accusation was made. No theft occurred. Officer Rodriguez threatened to arrest this young lady based purely on assumption and bias. Gonzalez turned to face the cabin full of passengers, many still recording on their phones. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department for how this situation has been handled. Officer Rodriguez will be immediately suspended pending a full internal investigation. Suspended Miguel Santos asked, still live streaming to over 300,000 viewers. He violated this girl's civil rights, threatened to arrest her without evidence, and did it all while being recorded. Suspension seems inadequate. You're absolutely right, Gonzalez replied. Carlos badge and weapon. Now. You're relieved of duty effective immediately. The cabin watched in stunned silence as Rodriguez, hands shaking, unbadged his police badge and handed over his service weapon. 15 years of law enforcement ended in front of hundreds of thousands of social media viewers. Thomas Bradford stepped forward, having watched one of the most public terminations in police history. Lieutenant Gonzalez, United Airways, takes full responsibility for escalating this situation unnecessarily. We should have de-escalated instead of involving law enforcement. Mr. Bradford Amara spoke for the first time since the police supervisor arrived. Your company didn't just fail to de-escalate. Your employees actively participated in racial profiling. They chose to believe accusations without evidence because those accusations fit their assumptions about who belongs in first class. Bradford looked around the cabin, seeing the faces of passengers who had witnessed his company's institutional failures in real time. Miss Johnson, you're absolutely right, and that's going to change starting today. How? Amara asked simply. How exactly is it going to change? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Bradford realized that vague promises of improvement wouldn't satisfy anyone who had witnessed this failure of human decency. Effective immediately, Bradford announced to the cabin and the hundreds of thousands watching online, United Airways is implementing what we're calling the Amara Protocol. Zero tolerance for passenger profiling, mandatory de-escalation training for all customer-facing employees, and an independent oversight board to investigate discrimination complaints. The Amara Protocol. Amara repeated, surprised to hear her name attached to corporate policy. Miss Johnson, what happened to you? Exposed failures throughout our organization. The least we can do is ensure your experience leads to meaningful change that protects other passengers. David Johnson's voice came through the speakerphone. Thomas, that's a good start. But my daughter didn't ask to become the face of airline discrimination reform. She just wanted to fly to Boston for her MIT interview. Bradford looked stricken. Your MIT interview? Miss Johnson, we've completely disrupted your travel plans. Let me personally ensure you get to Boston tonight. Mr. Bradford. Amara said quietly, I don't need special treatment now. I just needed basic human dignity 2 hours ago. What I want is for other passengers to receive that dignity without having to become social media martyrs. Her words cut through the corporate damage control to the heart of what really mattered. This wasn't about special compensation or VIP treatment. This was about fundamental respect and human decency. Trevor Mills, who had been silent since finding the bracelet that exposed the entire false accusation, finally approached Amara's seat. Miss Johnson, I owe you an apology that I know can never undo what I put you through. I failed you. I failed my profession. And I failed as a human being. Amara looked at him with sadness rather than anger. Mr. Mills, I hope you learn from this. I hope you remember how it felt to choose the easy path over the right path, and I hope you never make that choice again. Trevor nodded, understanding that forgiveness wasn't something he could demand, but only earn through future actions. Victoria Hartwell, who had been notably quiet during the official responses, made one final attempt to justify her behavior. This whole thing has been blown completely out of proportion. I made an honest mistake. The cabin erupted in response from multiple passengers. Honest mistake, Dr. Kim scoffed. You called her your kind before you ever claimed anything was missing. Lady, we heard exactly what you said, Miguel added. There was nothing honest about it. Lieutenant Gonzalez addressed Victoria directly. Ma'am, you've filed a false police report, made defamatory statements, and initiated what appears to be a hate incident. You'll be receiving a citation, and the district attorney will determine if additional charges are warranted. The deliberate accountability was falling into place like dominoes. Rodriguez fired Trevor, suspended Victoria facing charges. Bradford implementing policy changes, and the entire incident documented for the world to see. But the real resolution came from Amara herself, who stood up from her seat for the first time since the confrontation began and addressed the cabin full of witnesses and the global audience watching online. I want everyone to understand something. This wasn't about me getting special treatment or recognition. This was about basic human dignity. Every person, regardless of age or race or appearance, deserves to be treated with respect until proven otherwise. What happened here today happens to people every day who don't have cameras recording or fathers with influence or the privilege of education and opportunity. Her words resonated through the cabin and across social media platforms, transforming a discrimination incident into a broader conversation about justice, equality, and human dignity. If this experience changes anything, Amara continued, I hope it reminds everyone that we have the power to choose kindness over suspicion, investigation over assumption, and dignity over discrimination. The young woman who had been threatened with arrest just hours before had become an unintentional leader teaching adults about courage, grace, and moral clarity under pressure. 3 weeks later, Amara Johnson walked across the campus of MIT where her interview had been rescheduled and conducted via video conference from a United Airways VIP lounge. She had been accepted with a full scholarship, but more importantly, she had sparked changes that would outlast her college career. The Amara Protocol had become industry standard within days of its announcement. Delta, American Southwest, and JetBlue had all implemented similar policies after witnessing the public relations catastrophe that had befallen United Airways. The aviation industry had transformed overnight with passenger rights and anti-discrimination training becoming priority initiatives across all major carriers. Officer Carlos Rodriguez faced federal civil rights charges and had lost his law enforcement certification permanently. His 15-year career ended with his becoming a case study in police academies nationwide about the consequences of bias and procedural failures. Trevor Mills had been terminated by United Airways, but used his experience to become an advocate for customer service reform in the airline industry. He spoke at training seminars about the moment when choosing the easy path over the right path had cost him his career and nearly destroyed a teenager's life. Victoria Hartwell faced criminal charges for filing false police reports and civil lawsuits for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her social media infamy had made her unemployable in her social circles, forcing her to confront the consequences of her racism in the most public way possible. But the most significant change was cultural. The video of Amara's confrontation had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms, making her quiet dignity under pressure a viral symbol of grace and strength. The Amara way became shorthand for responding to discrimination with composure and moral clarity. Thomas Bradford had kept his promise about institutional change. United Airways customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs as employees properly trained in de-escalation and bias recognition began treating all passengers with genuine respect. The company's stock price had not only recovered but reached new heights as investors recognized the value of authentic corporate social responsibility. David Johnson had used the incident to launch a broader initiative through Johnson Global Logistics, partnering with civil rights organizations to provide transportation services for legal challenges to institutional discrimination. His daughter's experience had reminded him that business success meant nothing without social responsibility. The ripple effects extended far beyond aviation. The incident had been studied in business schools, law schools, and police academies as a case study in how individual bias could create institutional crises. The careful documentation of the confrontation had provided researchers with unprecedented insight into how discrimination unfolds and how social media can create accountability. But perhaps most importantly, Amara herself had grown into her role as an unexpected advocate for civil rights and dignity. She spoke at conferences about the power of remaining composed under pressure, the importance of institutional accountability, and the responsibility of witnesses to document and challenge injustice. I never wanted to become famous for being discriminated against, she told a congressional hearing on passenger rights 6 months after the incident. But if my experience helps prevent other people from facing the same thing, then I'm glad it happened the way it did. Her testimony led to federal legislation requiring bias training for all transportation industry employees and establishing an independent oversight board for civil rights complaints in travel. The young woman who had just wanted to fly to Boston for a college interview had accidentally triggered a national conversation about justice, dignity, and institutional accountability that would influence policy for decades to come. Miguel Santos had parlayed his viral video into a career as a civil rights documentarian, using social media to expose discrimination and hold institutions accountable. His live stream of Amara's confrontation had won a journalism award and inspired countless other citizens to document injustice when they witnessed it. Dr. Janet Kim became a spokesperson for bystander intervention, teaching medical professionals and others about the responsibility of witnesses to speak up when they see discrimination or abuse. Her medical documentation of the psychological impact on Amara had been crucial in the legal proceedings that followed. Robert Chen, at 80 years old, became an unexpected social media personality offering historical perspective on civil rights progress and setbacks. His gentle but firm support for Amara during her confrontation had resonated with viewers across generational lines. The transformation wasn't just corporate or legal, it was cultural. Passengers began reporting discrimination incidents more frequently, confident that they would be taken seriously. Airlines competed to demonstrate their commitment to passenger dignity. Airport police departments implemented new training based on Rodriguez's failures. Most importantly, young people like Amara felt empowered to stand up for their rights, knowing that dignity and composure could be more powerful than anger or violence in creating lasting change. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Amara Johnson walked through Boston, Logan International Airport, heading home to Atlanta for Thanksgiving break. She was wearing the same Howard University sweatshirt, the same worn sneakers, the same simple style that had somehow triggered such a massive confrontation. But everything was different now. Miss Johnson, the gate agent, said with genuine warmth and recognition, "Seat 2A is ready for you. Thank you for flying United." Amara smiled, appreciating the courtesy but no longer needing the special recognition. She had learned that true progress wasn't measured in individual treatment, but in universal standards of dignity and respect. As she boarded the aircraft, she noticed the small placard near the first-class entrance. The Amara Protocol. Listen, verify, elevate. Every passenger deserves dignity. It still felt surreal to see her name associated with corporate policy, but she had come to understand that change often comes from unexpected places. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, greeted each passenger with genuine courtesy and attention. During the safety briefing, she included language about passenger rights and the crew's commitment to treating everyone with respect. These weren't empty corporate phrases. They were promises backed by training oversight and accountability. The passenger in seat 1B was an elderly white gentleman who nodded politely when Amara took her seat. No assumptions, no questions, no suspicious glances. Just the normal courtesy that should have been standard all along but had taken a viral video and corporate crisis to establish. Amara pulled out her phone and saw a text from her father. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Not for what happened to you, but for who you became because of it." She reflected on the journey from that terrifying confrontation to this peaceful moment. United Airways had reported their highest customer satisfaction scores in company history, not because of new planes or better food, but because their employees had finally learned to see passengers as human beings first. The Amara Protocol had been adopted by 12 major airlines worldwide, creating international standards for passenger dignity and anti-discrimination procedures. Police departments across the country used Rodriguez's termination as a training example of how bias could destroy careers and violate civil rights. Officer Rodriguez was working mall security, his law enforcement career permanently over. Trevor Mills was teaching customer service seminars, using his failure as a teaching tool for others. Victoria Hartwell had moved to Europe after becoming unemployable, in her social circles a cautionary tale about the consequences of public racism. But the real victory wasn't in individual consequences. It was in cultural change. Young people of color reported feeling safer in travel situations, knowing that discrimination would be documented, reported, and addressed. Airlines competed to demonstrate their commitment to passenger dignity. Airport culture had shifted from suspicion first to service first. As the plane lifted off from Boston, Amara looked out the window at the city lights below. She thought about all the students at MIT who would never know her story, all the passengers who would travel safely without facing what she had faced, all the changes that had rippled outward from one terrible moment, turned into a teaching opportunity. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Annual report shows 73% decrease in aviation discrimination complaints. Since implementation of universal passenger dignity protocols, the numbers told the story better than any speech could. Real change, measurable change, lasting change. She had missed her original MIT interview, but gained something more valuable, the knowledge that individual courage properly documented and broadly shared could transform entire industries. That dignity under pressure could be more powerful than anger or violence in creating lasting justice. The flight was smooth, the service was excellent, and the atmosphere was respectful. Amara opened her laptop to work on a paper about institutional change and social media accountability, but instead found herself smiling at the simple miracle of flying without incident. The kind of normal, boring, dignified travel experience that every passenger deserved, but that had taken a viral confrontation to guarantee. As the plane crossed into Georgia airspace heading toward a Thanksgiving reunion with family, Amara reflected on how one phone call had indeed been powerful enough to stop a 300-ton aircraft. But more importantly, it had been powerful enough to restart an entire industry's approach to human dignity. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest act of refusing to be treated as less than human. Sometimes justice comes not from violence or protest, but from quiet strength, properly witnessed and broadly shared. And sometimes a teenager in a hoodie can teach an entire nation about the power of grace under pressure. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. If this story moved you, please hit that like button right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Every share helps spread the message that discrimination has no place in our world. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. Because change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice as normal. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, and remember, your voice matters, your dignity matters, and your courage to stand up for others can change the world. Until next time, stay strong, stay just, and never underestimate the power of doing what's right.